She had been following the rail line for 2 days when the smell stopped her. Not walking on the tracks themselves. She never walked on the tracks. You learned that quickly enough when you travelled this way, that the rail bed was private in a different sense than a road, and that the men who patrolled it were not interested in explanations. She kept a 1/4 mile off the line, moving through the trees parallel to it, close enough to use it as a bearing, and far enough to look like she was going somewhere else. The line ran northeast, through a long mountain valley. It was the direction she needed to go, and it was the only geography she had that made that direction clear. The day had been overcast since before she was awake. Late October, the last days of it, and the mountains had been pulling cloud off the ridgeline since morning. Most of the leaves were down. The trees were stripped enough that she could see through them to the rail grade most of the time. 2 iron rails on a crushed gravel bed, catching what light there was in the sky and giving none of it back. Her pack weighed 30 pounds, maybe a little more. She knew the number from a postal scale in a hardware store, 2 towns back, a town she had no particular reason to return to. 2 changes of clothes in a plastic bag, a wool blanket, half a box of crackers, a tin of sardines, a folding knife, a road atlas worn soft at the spine, a small notebook, and a short pencil she had sharpened with the knife until it was half its original length. Her boots were men's work boots, half a size too large, picked up from a church donation bin in Tennessee 6 weeks ago. The right boot fit, almost right. The left one she had padded with a folded strip of cardboard at the heel, which had been replaced twice since Tennessee and was due for replacement again. She had $14 and a handful of change. The smell came from ahead and slightly left, carried on a gust that also carried the first hint of evening in it, that particular cooling of air you felt before you saw the light go. She stopped walking and stood with both hands at her sides and breathed it in, coal dust, old iron, and below both of those something else entirely, something cold and stone dark, the specific smell of depth, the way a deep well smells at its lip before you lower the bucket. She had encountered that smell before. In a limestone cave outside of Kentucky she had sheltered in during a 3-day rain, and in a derelict mine entry in West Virginia, where she had spent one night before thinking better of it. It was the smell of a place where the rock had been opened and the air inside it had not moved in a long time. She moved toward it. The tree line broke, and the rail grade came up on her left. She stepped up onto the gravel and looked both ways along the track. Nothing in either direction. The line ran east for a 1/4 mile before it curved away into a hillside cut. She could see the cut from where she stood. The hillside blasted back to make room for the track. The exposed rock face maybe 40 feet high. Red-brown shale in horizontal bands. Thin seams of darker stone between them. The smell was strongest from that direction. She walked toward the cut. At the base of the cut face, where the blasted rock met the gravel grade, there was a door. She stopped 6 feet from it and looked at it without approaching. A wooden door, 5 feet tall at most, 3 feet wide, set into a timber frame that had been seated directly into the rock. The timber was old enough that the checking had gone deep, the surface roughened to a grey that matched the stone around it. But the frame was square in the rock. It had not moved with the ground. The door itself was built from planks fitted close together, face grain showing tight annual rings, banded at the top and bottom with flat iron that had gone orange with rust, but had not let go. The latch was a simple iron bar dropped into a bracket on the right side of the frame, the kind you operated from outside. It meant the space behind the door was accessed from out here, not from within. It was not a room someone lived in and locked from the inside. She walked up to it and put her hand on the latch bar. The iron was cold. Surface rust came off on her palm. She lifted the bar and it came free of the bracket, without resistance, balanced cleanly, and she set it against the frame. She pulled the door open. The smell that came out was the coal dust and iron and stone cold she had been following, but concentrated now, filling the space around her in a way the open air had diluted. She held the door with one hand and did not enter. She let her eyes work first. The shaft ran straight back into the hillside. She could see, perhaps, 20 feet before the light from the door failed. The ceiling dropped inside the first few feet to a height that would require a stoop. Maybe 5 feet clear at its lowest. The walls were rough-cut shale, not smoothed, left as the drills and blasting had made them, with timber shoring at intervals along both walls, old-growth posts, thick enough that she would not have been able to close her arms around them, set into the earth at the base, with crossbeams notched at the top. The floor was packed earth and small gravel, cambered slightly towards the mouth, built to drain. It was dry. Along the left wall, iron brackets had been fixed into the stone. She counted 6 of them from where she stood, all at chest height. Most were empty. One, about 15 feet into the shaft, held a coil of rope hanging from a loop. The rope was manila and old, the colour of old wheat. She studied the shaft for a long time without going in. A man who maintained track for the railroad in West Virginia had told her about these one winter evening in a town where they had both come to use the library. He had called them dry man's holes. You built them into the rock face near the grade, so the section crew had somewhere to go when lightning came off a ridge with no warning, when there was no runoff and no shed and no time to move. The brackets held lanterns. You stored a set of tools in one sometimes, things the crew needed and did not want to carry in every day. The rope she could not explain from what she knew. A pull line for something too heavy to carry in arms, maybe. A safety line for someone working in the dark. She filed it. She checked the door hinges, both iron, both fixed with bolts driven through the timber. She swung the door through its full range. It moved on both hinges without binding. She found a stone the right size near the base of the cut, roughly the shape of a brick. She wedged it against the inside of the door frame, low, where it would hold the door open if she let it go. She went inside. The stoop began at 8 feet in. She lowered her head and stayed in the stoop. Her pack brushed the ceiling twice in the first 10 feet, and she angled herself forward to give it clearance. The stone walls, close on either side, showed the tool marks of whoever had drilled and blasted the passage. Long parallel gouges in the shale where the bits had worked. The air temperature dropped 2 or 3 degrees from what it had been at the door. Not cold exactly. The cold of a space that stayed the same temperature year-round, not warming in summer and not freezing in winter. She moved to the rope bracket and took the rope in both hands and pulled down on it. It held her weight without stretching or shedding fibre. Manila stored dry, held its strength for a long time. Whoever had hung this had stored it right. She moved past the bracket, deeper into the shaft, her left hand trailing the wall. The light from the door was thin by 20 feet and nearly gone by 30. She moved by feel and by the sound of her boots on the floor, keeping toward the centre, where the drainage slope was gentlest. At 40 feet or so, her right hand found air. She stopped and turned right. An opening in the wall. She crouched in front of it. 3 feet wide, 2.5 feet tall. A crawl through. The edges had been dressed with a chisel, the corners cut even, the opening not accidental but made. She put her hand inside and felt the air from beyond. Cooler than the shaft. The deep cold was stronger here, coming from whatever lay on the other side. She pulled her hand back and straightened up. The light from the door was still enough, just to confirm the main shaft continued past the opening and ended at a fitted stone wall at the back. Rough mortar, old. She moved to it and pressed her palm flat against the stone. It did not move and did not flex. She turned back toward the door. She did not go through the crawl-through that evening. There was a rule she had arrived at over years of sleeping in places that were not meant for sleeping, which was that you did not explore unfamiliar passages in failing light. In failing light you missed the things that mattered and noticed the wrong things instead. You saved the rest for morning light or for a working lantern, whichever came first. She went back to the entrance and moved the wedge stone inside the door and pulled the door most of the way shut. She sat down against the left wall of the shaft with her pack beside her, 6 feet inside, in the last grey working light from the door gap. She ate half the crackers and the full tin of sardines, tipping the tin at the end to get the oil, which mattered when you were not eating enough fat. She drank carefully from the canteen. She had filled it that afternoon from a seep off a rock face, where the water came clear and cold over limestone, and it tasted of nothing. Which was correct. She pulled the wool blanket from her pack and spread it over her legs. She watched the light at the door gap. It changed by degrees. The grey gold of late afternoon went flat grey, then the blue-grey that came at the last of dusk. She watched the stone wall across from her lose its texture in that order. The far distances going first, the walls close to her holding their shape longer, the doorframe's outline held when everything else had gone. Then the outline softened, and the inside of the shaft and the outside were both dark, and the only difference between them was the faint quality of the night sky through the door gap, which was a deeper blue-black than the black of the shaft interior. She lay down with her pack under her head and pulled the blanket to her chin and closed her eyes. The floor was packed earth under her, cool but not cold. The shaft was warmer than the air outside, the surrounding hillside a great weight of stone that held what the day had put into it and gave it back slowly. Her hip found a flat section of floor. She shifted once, settled, and stopped shifting. She was asleep before the thought she was following finished. The vibration woke her. Not sound. Vibration. Something in the stone floor working up through the packed earth and into her hip and her shoulder and the back of her head, where it rested on her pack. She opened her eyes to complete dark and lay still. Her ears found only the particular silence of a sealed stone space, heavier than the silence of open ground, a silence that sat on you slightly. Then, under it, the thing that had woken her. Not a sound exactly. A quality. A pressure in the stone coming in a pulse, very low, very even, moving from her right where the rail line was, toward her left. She sat up and pressed both palms flat on the floor. There it was, a rhythm in the rock, regular, coming at intervals that a person could count, not the random settling of old timber, not wind. She pressed harder, and it came clearer, the frequency moving up through the packed earth into her palms. She knew that rhythm. She had lain near enough to rail lines to know it. She found the candle stub in the front pocket of her pack, and the waterproof case with the matches. She had 3 matches left, had been rationing them for 8 days. She opened the case and took 1 match out and held it with care. She struck it on the case flap. It caught on the second stroke. She moved the flame to the candle wick and held the candle still until it settled. The shaft came back around her. Stone walls close on both sides, the rope on the bracket down the tunnel from her hanging still. The door gap showing a darkness outside that was not the black of the shaft interior. She studied the gap. The darkness outside had that deep blue-black quality that came 2 hours before dawn, maybe less. The vibration in the floor was building. She stood and put the candle in her left hand and moved in the stoop toward the crawl-through. The floor was transmitting it more clearly now, the pulse coming up through her boot soles with more force. And underneath the pulse a second thing, a continuous low note, just at the edge of what her ears could register. A diesel engine working against a grade. She had lived 3 years near a rail yard in Ohio, and she knew that sound, the particular labour of a locomotive when the load was behind it and the slope was against it, the way the engine note changed with the terrain. She had come over a grade yesterday afternoon, the line rising from the valley floor through a long series of curves before levelling at the cut. The grade was to the west and below her. The train was coming up it. She reached the crawl-through and crouched and pressed her ear to the stone wall beside the opening. The engine note was there now, low and continuous, small changes in pitch as the load shifted with the curves. Underneath it, the wheel percussion the 2-beat rhythm of each truck crossing a rail joint. The train was slow, a loaded freight working uphill. She stood and thought through what she knew about the shaft. The shaft ran perpendicular to the rail line. The entrance was in the cut face at the base of the grade. The rail bed was level with the entrance, not above her. The shaft went into the hillside, not under the grade. A train on the tracks would pass beside the cut face, and its vibration would travel into the rock through the rail bed foundation, through the shale, through the timber shoring, through the packed earth floor, and into her body. There was no train coming through this shaft. The question was what the vibration did to the stone overhead and to the shoring timbers. She looked at the ceiling. The crossbeams notched above the shoring posts were old-growth timber. She pressed up on the nearest one with the flat of her free hand. It did not give. The timber was hard with age, and it had been bearing the weight above it for long enough that it had stopped flexing. She pressed harder. Nothing. She went through the crawl-through. She moved on hands and knees with the candle held ahead, elbows taking the weight on the packed earth of the passage, knees following. Wax dripped onto the back of her right hand, twice in the 8 feet between the shaft and what lay beyond. The air pressure shifted before she was through. She felt the space open before she could see it. The temperature dropped. 2 degrees. She came out into a chamber. She stood carefully, 6 inches of clearance above her if she stood to her full height. She stayed at a half stoop and lifted the candle. Roughly circular, maybe 12 feet across, the walls natural stone. Not drilled or shaped, the way stone looks when a fisher opens it, rather than a tool. The floor was packed earth with bare rock showing where the earth had never filled in. The ceiling had 2 small calcium formations in the far corner, pale and dry. Against the left wall, a wooden crate. Against the right wall, a second crate. And from an iron hook driven into a crack in the stone overhead, a lantern hung. The glass chimney in place, the reservoir empty and dark. The vibration came through the walls and through the floor simultaneously now. She felt it in her boot soles and in the palm she had pressed to the wall and in her chest. The engine note was audible without her ear, to the stone filling the chamber from all directions the way sound fills a stoned space, arriving from the surfaces rather than from a single point. She stayed still and let it come. The engine rose to its fullest note as the train came level with the cut face outside. 40 feet of shale between her and the wheels. The frequency held there. The calcium formation in the far corner released 1 drop of water. The lantern on the hook swung once, a 1/4 inch each way, and steadied. The crates did not move. The shoring timbers in the passage behind her did not shift or settle. She counted by her own heartbeat, which was the only measurement she had. 48 beats at the highest vibration. Then the engine note eased, the load lightening as the train crested the grade somewhere above, and the wheel percussion moved from a single fused sound back into its separate beats, and the beats spread further apart as the speed carried the train east. She listened to it diminish, heard it pass through the registers, heard the last low note of the engine extend past the curve and fail at the edge of what her ears could manage. Then it was gone. The lantern settled on its hook. The 2 drops of water that had fallen from the calcium formation left dark spots on the packed earth floor. She watched them and stayed where she was until she was certain the sound was not coming back. Then she breathed through her mouth for a moment. She looked at the crates. She went to the left one first. Pine, nailed shut with cut nails, square shafted, the kind used before wire nails became standard. She held the candle close to the top and read what remained of the stenciled letters. Red paint, badly faded. Most of the stencil was gone. 1 number had survived better than the rest. 1963. 30 years at least. She pressed her palm flat on the lid. The wood did not flex. She worked the corner with her folding knife, the blade under the lid at the seam, prying slowly 1/4 inch at a time, working around the edge before she tried the full lift. The nails pulled with effort, but they came. She lifted the lid. 9 glass bottles in dry sawdust that had gone the colour of old paper. Amber glass, each bottle sealed with a rubber stopper under a metal clamp closure, a wire clip securing the whole thing. She lifted one and held it to the candle. The contents moved when she tipped the bottle. Slow, heavier than water. Not water. Something with more weight to it, more body, oil or preservative. She could not determine more than that from the colour through amber glass. The stopper was intact. The wire clip was intact. The wax seal around the stopper neck had not cracked or dried out. She set it back and replaced the lid without nailing it. She went to the right crate. Canvas banding had been tacked across the lid in addition to the nails. 2 overlapping pieces meeting in the middle and tacked down at both ends. She cut the centre where the pieces met and peeled the canvas back. Worked the lid the same way. Cedar shavings inside, fine and pale. Dry, still holding the smell of cedar after 30 years sealed in the dark. She reached into the shavings and her fingers found a flat metal tin, the size of a thick book, fitted with a lid that had been sealed along the edge with a wax bead. She tried the lid. It did not move. She set it on the floor and reached back in. 3 more tins the same size. Under them, at the bottom of the crate, a cloth-wrapped bundle. She lifted it out and unwrapped it. A draw knife. Blade about 6 inches across, a turned handle at each end, the kind of tool you held with both fists and pulled toward yourself to shape a piece of wood. The steel had been coated in grease before it was wrapped. The grease hardened to a pale wax now, but it had done the work it was meant to do. She pressed her thumbnail against the flat of the blade. The metal was grey and clean. She ran the edge lightly across the stone floor, and the iron held its shape. She rewrapped it and set it back in the shavings. She did not open the sealed tins. Someone had sealed them with enough care that opening them was not a casual decision, and she did not know enough about this place yet to make it. She put the lid back on the second crate and set it flush. She looked around the chamber with the candle held low, the lantern on the hook, the 2 crates, the bare stone of the walls, the calcium formations in the far corner, and, in the stone above the corner, a fissure she had not noticed before, a crack in the ceiling about a foot wide at its widest, running diagonally through the rock. She held the candle up toward it, and the flame leaned slightly toward the crack. Air moved through it. It was open to the surface, somewhere above. She noted this, without knowing yet what it meant. She went back to the second crate and lifted the loose lid and reached into the cedar shavings. One more time, running her hands along the bottom and all 4 walls. She had not been thorough in the first pass. Her fingers found something she had missed, a flat object against the left wall of the crate, thin, pushed down into the shavings. A notebook. Not her kind, not the soft spiral bound she carried. Cardboard cover, thick and stiff, the cover warped slightly from decades of humidity changes, but the pages still intact when she opened it carefully. The handwriting on the first page was pencil, small and even, written in 2 columns. Not a journal, an inventory. She held it toward the candle and read down the left column. Amber oil. 9 bottles. Sealed. Sound. Cedar packed. 4 tins. Sealed. Sound draw knife. 1. Greased. Sound. Rope. 1 length. 60 feet. Bracket. Lamp. 1. Hook. Reservoir empty. She read it twice. Every item on the list was something she had found. Everything in the order she had moved through the chamber, as though the writer had documented it in the sequence they would have walked it themselves, starting at the door and working back. She turned the pages carefully. The inventory continued for 2 more pages, items in the back of the chamber she had not yet examined. 3 flat pans on a shelf behind her, a whetstone, a folded length of canvas, a small hand drill with 3 bits, a coil of snare wire. She turned to the last page, 1 entry, not in column format, not in pencil, in ink, darker and more deliberate, written separately from everything that came before it. She held the notebook as close to the candle as she dared and read it. If you found this useful, the spring is 30 yards north of the door. You can stay as long as you work. She read it again. She stood in the chamber with the notebook in both hands, and the candle burning toward its last half-inch, and the fissure in the ceiling above her, drawing the flame toward it, in a slow lean, and everything in the shaft exactly as she had found it, 30 yards north. She closed the notebook and put it inside her jacket. She did not go out immediately. She looked at the sealed tins on the floor and picked up the first one and held it. Lighter than it looked. Not empty, but whatever was inside did not shift when she tilted it. Paper, possibly, or something dried. She set it back. She went to the back of the chamber and found the shelf she had not examined. 3 flat pans, the kind you cooked on over open fire, nested, the iron slightly rusted on the cooking surface, but the walls and handles sound. The whetstone beside them was a good piece of fine-grained stone. The canvas, folded in a square, was oilskin treated, stiff with age but not cracked, the oil still in the fabric. She set everything back where she found it. She took the notebook. She took nothing else. Not yet, because she did not know enough about the place to know what taking something meant. She went back through the crawl-through and through the main shaft. At the door she checked the shoring posts nearest the entrance and ran her hand along the ceiling timber closest to the door. Everything she touched was solid. The train had come, and the shaft had taken the vibration and distributed it, and let it go, and the stone above her was still there. She pushed the door fully open and stepped outside. The morning hit her. The cloud from the day before was gone. The sky was clear and very pale at the eastern ridgeline. The light beginning without the source being visible, the high shale outcrops along the ridge, going from black to deep red-brown as the sun climbed from behind them. Cold air off the mountain, sharp enough to make her eyes water for a moment. She stood in the mouth of the shaft and breathed it. Below the cold and the shale she could smell water. Not the canteen kind, not a slow mineral seep. Moving water, the specific smell of a spring, water that had travelled a long way through rock before it came out. 30 yards north. She turned from the shaft door and faced north and began to walk. The slope above the cut face rose in stages, shale ledges with thin soil, second growth scrub in the crevices. She moved up the first stage and along the base of the next ledge, and counted her paces. At 30 she stopped and looked around her. The limestone shelf was above her by 6 feet, a horizontal slab jutting from the slope like a low roof, running perhaps 20 feet east to west. Below its lip, where the cold air pooled in the morning before the sun reached it, a curtain of dried brush had been fixed into a crack in the rock with a short piece of iron rod. Someone had cut the brush and placed it and staked it deliberately. It was a screen. She pushed the brush aside and crouched below the shelf. The ground here was different from the slope around it, dark and soft and cold, the colour of ground that stayed wet long after the surface dried. The rock face above the entrance was stained in long vertical stripes of grey-green, the kind of stain that mineral water leaves on stone over years. And, at the base of the rock face, fitted into a crack in the limestone, with grey mortar packed around it, and dried hard, a short iron pipe angled down at the tip. She put her palm beneath the pipe's end and waited. The water came, cold enough to pull the feeling from her fingers in the first second. A thin stream, steady, not a gush but not a trickle either, the flow of something fed by depth rather than surface runoff. She cupped her hands and drank. The taste was limestone and nothing else, which was the taste of water that had been filtered through enough rock to leave nothing behind it. She drank a second time, and a third, and then straightened and wiped her hands on her jacket. She stood in the shadow of the limestone shelf and looked at the slope around her, the ridge above, the rail line below, the 2 rails catching the first direct light as the sun cleared the eastern ridge and hit the grade at a low angle. The shaft door set into the cut face below her, The door she had pulled shut behind her, the latch bar in its bracket. Water, shelter, tools, a place where the world moved overhead, and the stone held how long she would stay, was not a question she could answer from here. What working meant in the context of that final sentence, she could guess at from the tools in the chamber, and the pipe in the rock, and whatever was in those sealed tins. But questions about the land, and who held it, and how often the railroad ran this stretch, were questions for another day, when she knew more about the place, and could ask them from a steadier position. For now, what she had was today, and the morning was clear, and she had not been rained on in 2 nights. She went back down the slope, through the door, into the shaft. The lantern needed oil, and she had not found it yet. The rope on the bracket needed testing for the weight she thought it might have been meant to carry. The 3 sealed tins were on the chamber floor where she had set them, and she had not opened them. The fissure in the ceiling above the crates connected to something above the ridge, and she had not traced where it came out. There was a shelf behind her, in the chamber she had barely glanced at. There was a stovepipe somewhere that she had not seen a stove for, and the notebook had a front she had not yet read. She set her pack against the left wall of the shaft, and pulled out the notebook. She opened it to the first page and got to work.